Big Bobby Iger told investors behind closed doors on Friday that the Walt Disney Company is ready to, quote unquote, lower the noise when it comes to the House of Mouse and their engagement in the culture war. But things are not looking like the volume levels will be decreased. No, it is the absolute opposite. As we take a look now at the once wonderful Snow White, now turned into a socialist revolutionist, joined by dirty hippies perhaps. You won't believe the budget, folks. You won't believe how much they're spending to get right back into the middle of the culture war. All right, folks, it's time to talk about Snow White because it is the gift that never stops giving when it comes to driving us absolutely batty about what Disney will do and double-crossing everything that Iger says when he promises to investors, we won't keep going into the culture war. We'll be well-behaved, we promise. Yeah. Well, Culture Casino's always well-behaved, and he's back on the channel. Culture, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me, Pro. I truly appreciate it. Very honored.
It's a joy as always, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this one, so let's dive straight in.
Okay.
This coming from our very good friends over at Bounding Into Comics. John Trent, the author of this one. And folks, if you're not watching That Park Place, the YouTube channel, you should be, because John is often featured reading some of his articles and giving extra insight into those fantastic stuff. Initial costs for Rachel Zegler's Snow White film are already shockingly high. A new report details that the initial cost for the Walt Disney World, for the Walt Disney Company's live-action Snow White film starring Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot came in at a $209.3 million peg. But peg it not, folks, because it goes way higher. This new report from Caroline Reed at Forbes reveals that the Snow White production went under the codename Hidden Heart Productions Limited in the United Kingdom. According to Reed in the UK filings for the company, the Walt Disney Company had already spent $209. However, she notes that the United Kingdom's government has granted Disney a $41.1 million tax rebate, meaning the net spend so far is just a paltry $168.2. The key thing to point out here, and this is, I think, the extra part of this, is that these costs only go through July 31st of 2022. Its costs are likely to sharply rise as more than a year of post-production still has to be done after the date of the financial statements. And it's not just the post-production that will increase the costs. We know from earlier this year they were also doing pickup shots without Rachel Zegler. And don't forget, folks, that they're doing reshoots with her as well. Reacting to this information, Valiant Renegade, who's that, said it looks like the final production cost is going to be $300 million and could be actually north of $300 million. Now, here's where it gets a little bit wonky, Culture. In the original article, it's claimed that it will need to gross $336 million to break even. Now, that is ludicrous, but I have spoken enough. So, Culture, let me turn it to you, and you explain to the folks out there why this is a ludicrous number to say that it needs to break even. And then we'll ponder after this about whether or not that was a honestly made statement or if someone knew that that was ludicrous when they said it. Who knows? Go for it.
Well, I think that Carolyn Reed should know better if she doesn't know better, and I think that this is just misinformation that's being passed along to the end person. In this case, it's the wonderful readers of Forbes. The problem is that the film isn't even close to being completed. As written there in the article and as stated by Valiant Renegade at one point in time, there are a whole lot of other production costs that are not being accounted for, like everything after the July of 2022. So we're an entire year removed from that. We already know.
Our sources say that they're still going to be shooting this film once the strike is over. They still got to come back and do it.
Indeed, yeah, they're not done yet, and so the numbers being reported are very, very misleading, and not to make that very clear in the course of writing her article. I would say I'm a little bit disappointed, but the film itself is probably going to be upwards of $310 million would be my assessment. I think Valiant was even a little higher than that. And again, this is another folly that's sit squarely on Bob Iger's shoulders, because there is no chance that a film that deviates so wildly from the original material, which is, something that they hadn't done with these live actions until very recently, the last few years, you don't have a prayer of recovering this budget, because you're looking at, and I'm going to be even more aggressive about what I think this film needs to make. I think it's going to need to make somewhere close to $800 to $900 million to break even.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You've nailed it, Culture. And let's walk the folks out there why it's going to cost that much to make money, which it won't. It's going to lose money. But here's why. So let's give Disney the most kind and generous numbers we possibly can. All right, folks. At the low end of this now, $300 million is the lowest imaginable production budget, period. That's the lowest. Now, if they essentially abandon the movie in terms of marketing, okay, if they just abandon it, they still have to pay out requisite marketing issues that are part of sending any movie out there that are required by theatrical runs. So at the bare minimum, they're going to pay out $100 million in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that gets us to $400 million as the lowest possible, imaginable, realistic expenditure for the company. Now, once that $400 million is spent, the movie needs to go out there and make double that, essentially, to bring back 50%, which is the 50% that is returns to the theater, or excuse me, returns to the distributor after taxes and theatrical fees are taken out. So you get 50% back. So guess what? You got to make twice as much. So $800 million, double, $800 million is double of $400 million. $400 million is spend. So at the very low end, $800 million is how much this film has to make. It has absolutely no chance in this world to make $800 million. Now, what this means, Culture, is that Bob Iger went behind closed doors with some of the world's most important investors on Friday. We talked about this on the channel multiple times now. He went there and he told them, we're getting out of the culture war. We're going to lower the noise. It's not good for business. Now, folks, what have we said repeatedly about that? We've said, actions speak louder than words. Big Bobby, get off your hippo and show us that you're going to be better behaved. Well, let me tell you, Snow White and the Seven Dirty Hippies is one giant hand grenade tossed into the middle of the culture war, and it is an expensive one. So they are going to spend Indiana Jones, the Dial of Destiny money to lose Indiana Jones, the Dial of Destiny money in order to place themselves directly square in the middle of the culture war yet again with a young actress who is disliked, who continues to say things which are highly abrasive, highly contentious, completely divisive, and put them square back in the middle of all this drama once more. So, Culture, how is Bobby going to square this with the investors? What's he going to do to go back to them now and say, what's he going to do?
Well, look, I mean, the best, what he's going to do, I have no earthly idea at this point. He's done a lot of ridiculous things that have not served himself nor the company, and certainly hasn't taken care of the shareholders, which is part of his responsibility. In fact, it's one of his primary responsibilities as the CEO. But what could he do to save face here and to get out of the culture war? He would cancel the film. He would just write it off at this point. They would lose less money if he just wrote the film off. Yeah.
Take the penalty with the theaters, whatever it takes to get out of this situation. It's bad. Yeah. Now let's look and see how supposedly did these numbers get so wrong in the original report out of Forbes, which you would think at this point, folks, given the coverage that Valiant Renegade has done, given the coverage that we've done on this channel and others, you would think that the mainstream out there would have caught on that, hey, we can't keep doing this, but so far not. But here's how the faux pas occurred. She explains that studios typically receive 55% of box office grosses from domestic theaters and 43% of grosses from international markets. Now, all of that is mostly true. It's not true when you consider in China. So it depends on how much of a box office has its proportionality occurring in China. The more the proportion is China, the lower that international gross is. But anyway, thus she explains taking the average of 43 and 55 gives roughly a 50-50 split of the box office between theaters and studios. Well, it doesn't. It's less than that. But, hey, math. She then concludes, if Disney retains around 50% of the takings from Snow White, which was what we used, and we did that for simple. We like simple. So for simplicity's sake, the movie will need to gross $336.4 million just to cover its baseline spending of $168. And so what she did was she ignored that, there's a marketing expense. This movie's not done. She ignored everything. She essentially just said, here's what they've spent so far. And it's kind of like, Culture, if you were building a house and you had only framed in the house, right? There's no sheetrock, there's no wiring, there's no plumbing. And somebody went to the bank and said, okay, here's how much we've spent on the house so far. Go ahead and calculate the mortgage. And it's like, no, like no sane person, and you don't have to be in the housing industry to know this. You don't have to be a contractor to say, wait a minute, I don't think I'm going to give you a mortgage based just on the lumber. I don't think that's how that works. And this is the same thing with the movie. I think it stretches credulity here.
Oh, it does.
Just a wee bit culture that's how this was brought into fruition.
And again, I mean, in using the housing analogy, which I think is perfect, this is more like working with a general contractor and you've negotiated with the bank for a building loan, and you take draws out of that at each stage of completion, so that you can pay the contractors. So, like your assessment is correct. You paid for the foundation, so you paid the concrete guys, and then you paid for the framing, and you paid for that. Then you've got to pay the sheetrock guys, the roofing guys, all of that. You've got to get all these other people paid, and we're nowhere close on this film. That's the other thing that's magical here. And she's already taking into account the $41 million she believes that they're getting in tax credit from the UK government. She's already
right. Well, she grants them the entirety of that.
Yeah, which is crazy. And I'm going, this isn't even anywhere close, and this is very disingenuous of her.
So why, culture? Why do they do this? Well, and they know they're going to get hammered when we get a hold of these articles. Why do they do it?
At this point, I don't know, because now they're being caught consistently by those of us that work in this sphere, and they're being exposed for it. And then people like Valiant Renegade, who's just a phone call away, it seems, from many of these news organizations now, just burns them down and just says, well, they're lying, and he's right. I mean, I don't know why they continue to do it. Maybe because they're being told to do it. I mean, the oddest thing is, and again, this is a person who's very smart, works for a money magazine. Right. Wait a
minute, culture. Let's focus on that. A money magazine, folks. They're supposed to know how the money works.
Yeah,
we cover everything on this channel. Culture, you cover all kinds of pop culture.
Yeah.
We try to know what we're talking about when we do these things. You don't want to go into something and be completely aloof. I mean, the gulf. Think about it, culture. The gulf between reality and what this woman has put in the article. And we're not trying to be mean to her. No. We just want this to stop because it's ludicrous. If you come out and say that a film needs to make $300 million, and change to make a profit, and the reality is it's probably going to make almost $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's like saying, hey, you want to make a ride out to New York today, and you live in Jersey, and then instead you end up in Maine. It's like there's a difference here. Wait a minute.
Well, and here's the problem. I mean, ultimately, that we have, we're constantly having to repeat the same talking points, which I hate. I hate that we have to tell the audience, okay, we're not done yet with the budget, or this film needs to make X amount of money. It's pretty easy to calculate. You need to look at what the reported production budget is and multiply that by 2.8. That's what that film needs to make to break even.
Hey, culture. Let me make one point there, because you've opened up a brilliant doorway here too, because you're right. For the most part, it is easy to calculate these. However, let me say this.
Mm-hmm.
This film may actually need more money than what we usually do. And why? Well, I assume it's going to China. And she is a socialist revolutionist.
Mm.
That could do well in China. So the percentage of the box office that could come from China for this film, actually quite a bit higher. What percentage do studios get back from China? About 20%. Folks.
Yeah, I was going to say 20%.
Culture, take it away.
Sometimes less. And that's the other problem with her calculations, as you pointed out earlier, and of course, obviously just reinforced. China's not just the only international market. When you look at a film now, if you want to have good performance, if you want to make money in the theaters, your split between domestic earnings and international earnings need to look like 1/3 domestic, 2/3 international. So we're overestimating how much money may be going back to the distributor, in this case, Walt Disney, in the form of those receipts, those gross receipts. Those gross receipts aren't going to be, for Disney's cut, aren't going to be that much. Then you have to subtract taxes in different countries, et cetera, that are already taken out of that. So reported box office isn't even an accurate way to calculate this. But consider that, again, you're only getting how much percentage of gross receipts in the international markets? 43%.
Yep.
And if they make up 2/3 of the gross receipts,
I'm with you. There's no way this does well domestically. There is no way. This is dead to rights.
It deviated too far from the original material. Look, all you had to do was remake the 1937 classic, and at the time that cost $1.5 million, and it earned over the course of the first year $8 million. That's a pretty decent return when you're looking at what movies used to cost. And that was primarily domestic because it didn't have international distribution that I'm aware of.
The infrastructure did not exist across most of the world to even show theaters. I mean, this was brand new technology.
And what people forget is if you're going to compare apples and apples here. Okay, so you're doing a live action remake supposedly of this film, except it's as far away from that as you could possibly do. You should be returning the biggest film of all time, because Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937 was the biggest film of all time. It had earned the most money here in the United States.
Adjusted for inflation, it's still way up there.
Oh, it's close to $2 billion. If you adjust that, the earnings of as many times it's been re-released here in the States through, I think 97 was the last numbers I saw, but it was probably released more often than that. But you were looking at $184 million in total release. When you adjust for inflation, this film is somewhere close to $2 billion. And not only that, it was granted a special Oscar. It was that important. It was that groundbreaking a film. It was given a special Oscar, a full-size one, and then 7 little ones. So you are actually comparing a live action film with a radicalized young person who does not know how to shut their mouth or behave like an adult. And you're putting them in the most important film property that you have as a company.
Well, just looking at the numbers here, Culture, adjusted for inflation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the original film by the Walt Disney Company, still number one. If adjusted for inflation, still the top grossing animated film of all time. Now it's not the top grossing overall film.
No,
of the animated films, adjusted for inflation, it's top.
Yeah, without adjusting it for inflation, I think it comes in the 50s. But regardless, it's an insane thing to think about. This is the most important property, and this is the perfect film to go back to. Which is a colossal failure that they keep trying to prop up, and I'll stop talking.
Oh yes, well, and they've propped up Elemental too. 2 trillion people have watched it on Disney Plus now. Sure. We jest, folks, but only because Disney jests and doesn't say so. But going back to Bounding into Comics one last time, this, I think, is the great comparison. Given the massive budget, it's unlikely the film will recoup its cost. The most recent live-action film, Little Mermaid, only grossed $569 million this year. Culture, it seems to me that Snow White has more egg on her face than Ariel did. Snow White is just being roundly mocked. At least with the Little Mermaid, people were intrigued. Could Disney possibly pull this off, despite the cacophony of issues surrounding the marketing? With Snow White, people are just mocking it. I mean, just laughing out loud. And so, I think to end this video and our conversation today, I would like to consider what you said about at this point they should just pull the film. They should just take the loss. They should take the penalty with the theaters. So they've spent how much have they said they've spent on this on production so far? 160-ish?
Well, what Carolyn Reed is 168, 169, something like that. Yeah. Okay, after the tax rebate. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's think about this for a moment then. The film, by the end of this, right, they're saying it's going to be $300 million plus in production costs to get this thing out the door. Okay. So that's going to be another $140 million.
Oof.
Right. Marketing is going to be at least $100 million, but this is Disney and this is a princess. So you can probably bet on $200 million, but I'm just saying. All right. So here's my thought. I think this film is doomed to lose something like $300 million. I mean, I think this could be worse than Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Bad.
I think it'll lose. That's funny because you're right in the wheelhouse I was going to guess, because I think it'll lose even more than that. I think it'll lose. Yeah, I think it will lose equal to its production budget. It might lose. We're talking about top. This puts it in contention for the biggest flops of all time. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
This is just us looking at numbers and saying we don't see any way around this. So, Culture, here's the question. You're saying it could lose more than $300 million.
Yeah.
I'm saying they've spent $160. And they could take the penalty with the theaters, right? I don't know where that puts us. Maybe $200 million. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you right now. If Bob Iger wants to lower the noise, shut this thing down.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I think you can do. Unless you want to completely remake the movie, you can pull a Solo, but I don't know how this lead actress is going to, acquiesce to doing so. She's not going to want to change this to be proper to the original story. She's already come out and desecrated it. Yeah, she's bashed it. So culture. I think you're right. I think the only solution here for Disney is to walk away from it, divorce themselves from this effort.
I think you're spot on, and I'll even reiterate it in this way. If Bob Iger wants to prove that he wants to lower the noise and step away from the culture war, which we all know is baloney sausage.
That's right.
He would cancel this film. It would be a gesture. It would be an action. Actions speak louder than words. Actions actually indicate your intention. He's done nothing to indicate that he's really interested in that.
You know how he gets around it, culture? What he does is he says, we don't want to be part of the culture war. And then when you bring up any part that's, that is the culture war, you bring anything up that is, an issue inside that, and he'll say, oh, no, that's not the culture war. That's a moral imperative. And then, you can't ever peg down, well, what is the culture war if everything that's involved in the culture war is a moral imperative for you and for this company? And so that is how this just continues to go on and on and on. The issues in Florida are not the culture war. They are moral crimes of the day that must be campaigned against by a children's entertainment company.
Ooh. Yeah, he really does do that. He's been doing it ever since his return. If you remember his town hall meeting where he was sitting comfortably in that chair.
Well, he's the one who did Reimagine Tomorrow. He's the one who, all of this was greenlit under Bob Iger.
Yeah, well, it's convenient how that's left out of every conversation, isn't it?
Yes, well, thankfully, though, they do have emotional support hippos, and I suppose that will be needed as this company continues to circle the drain.
Oh, that's great, because you forgot to mention the 2-a-day showers.
Well said, culture. I don't know when it's going to be that investors are going to finally walk out of these meetings and say, you've lost more than half of your stock value. Your company is spiraling. We don't believe you anymore, Bobby. But at some point, it's going to have to happen. Other companies are not watching their values drop like this. And Bob Iger can ooze all the charisma he wants. The king of charisma is not the mouse messiah no more. He's got to get this thing turned around, and that means throwing some of these stupid projects out the door. All right, Culture, tell us where we can find you on this great, big, beautiful web.
You can find me right here at Culture Casino on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Minds, Getter, and X, the platform formerly known as Twitter.
And folks, don't forget also. Yes.
I was going to say, you can also find me on That Park Place, where I do the occasional appearance and also write the occasional piece. So, yeah.
That's right. And folks, I'm telling you right now, Culture is he's just a king over on That Park Place. He is doing fantastic news reports over there. So check it out. I also want to give a shout out to you're often on Midnight's Edge.
Oh,
and a key component of that on the panel. And so we just love being a part of this ecosystem, folks, and go support all of our friends out there, whether it's Midnight's Edge or Valiant Renegade or Bounding in Comics or Culture. This is a lovely place to be with lovely people who really do care about telling the truth. And I think that's ultimately what it's all about. Well, folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. It's the notification bell. And drop a comment down below. We cover your comments. We care about what you think. Are we too harsh on poor Snow White and the Seven Dirty Hippies? Or are we just doing math? Are we just doing simple math? How about that? Well, drop a comment down below. Maybe we're in the wrong, maybe we're in the right. We would sure love to know. Don't forget that the Pro Show is Thursdays, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursdays. You don't want to miss this next one. We got a lot to talk about with this WGA strike. Turns out we still don't know the details behind it. Why is that? Why are the shows not back going with the writing process? They're saying now it's going to be October. Will it become November? Ratification process. I guess it's going to be a little more tricky this time. All right, folks, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
This is Wilton the Troll reporting for That's Park Place, and I'm surrounded by loving and adoring people who are peacefully trying to make sure that poor kids aren't cold in the winter. And just behind me, You can see a totally natural bonfire for baking cookies or making marshmallows.
Yeah, so, Wilson, we're really appreciate the effort and stuff, but we're looking for real and, accurate news reporting on that park place.
So not like most news outlets, huh?
No.